Mahatma Gandhi Principles, Practices and Beliefs. Gandhi's statements, letters and life have attracted much political and scholarly analysis of his principles, practices and beliefs, including what influenced him. Some writers present him as a paragon of ethical living and pacifism, while others present him as a more complex, contradictory and evolving character influenced by his culture and circumstances. Influences. Gandhi grew up in a Hindu and Jain religious atmosphere in his native Gujarat, which were his primary influences, but he was also influenced by his personal reflections and literature of Hindu Bhakti saints, Advaita Vedanta, Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, and thinkers such as Tolstoy, Ruskin, and Thoreau. At age 57 he declared himself to be Advaitist Hindu in his religious persuasion, but added that he supported Dvaitist viewpoints and religious pluralism. Gandhi was influenced by his devout Vaishnava Hindu mother, the regional Hindu temples and saint tradition which coexisted with Jain tradition in Gujarat. Historian R.B. Cribb states that Gandhi's thought evolved over time, with his early ideas becoming the core or scaffolding for his mature philosophy. He committed himself early to truthfulness, temperance, chastity, and vegetarianism. Gandhi's London lifestyle incorporated the values he had grown up with. When he returned to India in 1891, his outlook was parochial and he could not make a living as a lawyer. This challenged his belief that practicality and morality necessarily coincided. By moving in 1893 to South Africa he found a solution to this problem and developed the central concepts of his mature philosophy. According to P. Parekh, 3 books that influenced Gandhi most in South Africa were William Salter's Ethical Religion, 1889, Henry David Thoreau's On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, 1849, and Leo Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You, 1894. Ruskin inspired his decision to live an austere life on a commune, at first on the Phoenix farm in Natal and then on the Tolstoy farm just outside Johannesburg, South Africa. The most profound influence on Gandhi were those from Hinduism, Christianity, and Jainism, states Parekh, with his thoughts in harmony with the classical Indian traditions, especially the Advaita or monistic tradition. According to Indira Kar and others, Gandhi was influenced by Vaishnavism, Jainism, and Advaita Vedanta. Balkrishna Gokhale states that Gandhi was influenced by Hinduism and Jainism, and his studies of Sermon on the Mount of Christianity, Ruskin, and Tolstoy. Additional theories of possible influences on Gandhi have been proposed. For example, in 1935, N. A. Tuthi stated that Gandhi was influenced by the reforms and teachings of the Swaminarayan tradition of Hinduism. According to Raymond Williams, Tuthi may have overlooked the influence of the Jain community, and adds close parallels do exist in programs of social reform in the Swaminarayan tradition and those of Gandhi, based on nonviolence, truth-telling, cleanliness, temperance and upliftment of the masses. Historian Howard states the culture of Gujarat influenced Gandhi and his methods. Tolstoy. Along with the book mentioned above, in 1908 Leo Tolstoy wrote a letter to a Hindu, which said that only by using love as a weapon through passive resistance could the Indian people overthrow colonial rule. In 1909, Gandhi wrote to Tolstoy seeking advice and permission to republish a letter to a Hindu in Gujarati. Tolstoy responded and the two continued a correspondence until Tolstoy's death in 1910. Tolstoy's last letter was to Gandhi. The letters concern practical and theological applications of nonviolence. Gandhi saw himself a disciple of Tolstoy, for they agreed regarding opposition to state authority and colonialism, both hated violence and preached non-resistance. However, they differed sharply on political strategy. Gandhi called for political involvement, he was a nationalist and was prepared to use non-violent force. He was also willing to compromise. It was at Tolstoy farm where Gandhi and Hermann Kallenbach systematically trained their disciples in the philosophy of nonviolence. Shrimad Rajchandra. Gandhi credited Shrimad Rajchandra, a poet and Jain philosopher, as his influential counselor. In Modern Review, June 1930, Gandhi wrote about their first encounter in 1891 at Dr. P.J. Mehta's residence in Bombay. Gandhi exchanged letters with Rajchandra when he was in South Africa, referring to him as Kavi, literally, poet. In 1930, Gandhi wrote, "Such was the man who captivated my heart in religious matters as no other man ever has till now. I have said elsewhere that in molding my inner life Tolstoy and Ruskin vied with Kavi. But Kavi's influence was undoubtedly deeper, if only because I had come in closest personal touch with him. Gandhi, in his autobiography, called Rajchandra his guide and helper and his refuge, in moments of spiritual crisis. He had advised Gandhi to be patient and to study Hinduism deeply. Religious texts. During his stay in South Africa, along with scriptures and philosophical texts of Hinduism and other Indian religions, Gandhi retranslated texts of Christianity such as the Bible, and Islam such as the Quran. A Quaker mission in South Africa attempted to convert him to Christianity. Gandhi joined them in their prayers and debated Christian theology with him, but refused conversion, stating he did not accept the theology therein or that Christ was the only Son of God. His comparative studies of religions and interaction with scholars led him to respect all religions as well as become concerned about imperfections in all of them and frequent misinterpretations. Gandhi grew fond of Hinduism, and referred to the Bhagavad Gita as his spiritual dictionary and greatest single influence on his life. On wars and nonviolence. Support for wars. Gandhi participated in South African war against the Boers, on the British side in 1899. Both the Dutch settlers called Boers and the Imperial British at that time discriminated against the colored races they considered as inferior, and Gandhi later wrote about his conflicted beliefs during the Boer War. He stated that when the war was declared, my personal sympathies were all with the Boers, but my loyalty to the British rule drove me to participation with the British in that war. According to Gandhi, he felt that since he was demanding his rights as a British citizen, it was also his duty to serve the British forces in the defense of the British Empire. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, nearing the age of 50, Gandhi supported the British and its allied forces by recruiting Indians to join the British Army, expanding the Indian contingent from about 100,000 to over 1.1 million. He encouraged his people to fight on one side of the war in Europe and Africa at the cost of their lives. Pacifists criticized and questioned Gandhi, who defended these practices by stating, according to Sankar Ghose, "It would be madness for me to sever my connection with the society to which I belong." According to Keith Robbins, the recruitment effort was in part motivated by the British promise to reciprocate the help with Swaraj, self-government, to Indians after the end of World War I. After the war, the British government offered minor reforms instead, which disappointed Gandhi. He launched his Satyagraha movement in 1919. In parallel, Gandhi's fellow men became skeptical of his pacifist ideas and were inspired by the ideas of nationalism and anti-imperialism. In a 1920 essay, after the World War I, Gandhi wrote, "Where there is only a choice between cowardice and violence, I would advise violence." Rahul Sagar interprets Gandhi's efforts to recruit for the British military during the war as Gandhi's belief that, at that time, it would demonstrate that Indians were willing to fight. Further, it would also show the British that his fellow Indians were their subjects by choice rather than out of cowardice. In 1922, Gandhi wrote that abstinence from violence is effective and true forgiveness only when one has the power to punish, not when one decides not to do anything because one is helpless. After World War II engulfed Britain, Gandhi actively campaigned to oppose any help to the British war effort and any Indian participation in the war. According to Arthur Herman, Gandhi believed that his campaign would strike a blow to imperialism. Gandhi's position was not supported by many Indian leaders, and his campaign against the British war effort was a failure. The Hindu leader, Tej Bahadur Sapru, declared in 1941, states Herman, "A good many Congress leaders are fed up with the barren program of the Mahatma." Over 2.5 million Indians ignored Gandhi, volunteered and joined on the British side. They fought and died as a part of the Allied forces in Europe, North Africa and various fronts of the World War II. Truth and Satyagraha. Gandhi dedicated his life to discovering and pursuing truth, or Satya, and called his movement as Satyagraha, which means appeal to, insistence on, or reliance on the truth. The first formulation of the Satyagraha as a political movement and principle occurred in 1920, which he tabled as resolution on non-cooperation in September that year before a session of the Indian Congress. It was the Satyagraha formulation and step, states Dennis Dalton, that deeply resonated with beliefs and culture of his people, embedded him into the popular consciousness, transforming him quickly into Mahatma. Gandhi based Satyagraha on the Vedantic ideal of self-realization, ahimsa, nonviolence, vegetarianism, and universal love. William Borman states that the key to his Satyagraha is rooted in the Hindu Upanishadic texts. According to Indira Kar, Gandhi's ideas on ahimsa and Satyagraha were founded on the philosophical foundations of Advaita Vedanta. I. Bruce Watson states that some of these ideas are found not only in traditions within Hinduism, but also in Jainism or Buddhism, particularly those about nonviolence, vegetarianism and universal love, but Gandhi's synthesis was to politicize these ideas. Gandhi's concept of Satya as a civil movement, states Glyn Richards, are best understood in the context of the Hindu terminology of Dharma and Rita. Gandhi stated that the most important battle to fight was overcoming his own demons, fears, and insecurities. Gandhi summarized his beliefs first when he said God is truth. He would later change this statement to truth is God. Thus, Satya, truth, in Gandhi's philosophy is God. Gandhi, states Richards, described the term God not as a separate power, but as the being, Brahman, Atman, of the Advaita Vedanta tradition, a non-dual universal that pervades in all things, in each person and all life. According to Nicholas Skare, this to Gandhi meant the unity of God and humans, that all beings have the same one soul and therefore equality, that Atman exists and is same as everything in the universe. Ahimsa, non-violence, is the very nature of this Atman. The essence of Satyagraha is soul force as a political means, refusing to use brute force against the oppressor, seeking to eliminate antagonisms between the oppressor and the oppressed, aiming to transform or purify the oppressor. It is not inaction but determined passive resistance and non-cooperation where, states Arthur Herman, love conquers hate. A euphemism sometimes used for Satyagraha is that it is a silent force or a soul force, a term also used by Martin Luther King Jr. during his famous I Have a Dream speech. It arms the individual with moral power rather than physical power. Satyagraha is also termed a universal force, as it essentially makes no distinction between kinsmen and strangers, young and old, man and woman, friend and foe. Gandhi wrote, "There must be no impatience, no barbarity, no insolence, no undue pressure. If we want to cultivate a true spirit of democracy, we cannot afford to be intolerant. Intolerance betrays want of faith in one's cause." Civil disobedience and non-cooperation as practiced under Satyagraha are based on the law of suffering, a doctrine that the endurance of suffering is a means to an end. This end usually implies a moral upliftment or progress of an individual or society. Therefore, non-cooperation in Satyagraha is in fact a means to secure the cooperation of the opponent consistently with truth and justice. While Gandhi's idea of Satyagraha as a political means attracted a widespread following among Indians, the support was not universal. For example, Muslim leaders such as Jinnah opposed the Satyagraha idea, accused Gandhi to be reviving Hinduism through political activism, and began effort to counter Gandhi with Muslim nationalism and a demand for Muslim homeland. The Untouchability leader Ambedkar, in June 1945, after his decision to convert to Buddhism and a key architect of the constitution of modern India, dismissed Gandhi's ideas as loved by blind Hindu devotees, primitive, influenced by spurious brew of Tolstoy and Ruskin, and there is always some simpleton to preach them. Winston Churchill caricatured Gandhi as a cunning huckster seeking selfish gain, an aspiring dictator, and an atavistic spokesman of a pagan Hinduism. Churchill stated that the civil disobedience movement spectacle of Gandhi only increased the danger to which white people there, British India, are exposed. Nonviolence. Although Gandhi was not the originator of the principle of nonviolence, he was the first to apply it in the political field on a large scale. The concept of nonviolence, ahimsa, has a long history in Indian religious thought, with it being considered the highest dharma, ethical value virtue, a precept to be observed towards all living beings, sarvbhuta, at all times, sarvata, in all respects, sarvatha, in action, words and thought. Gandhi explains his philosophy and ideas about ahimsa as a political means in his autobiography The Story of My Experiments with Truth. Gandhi was criticized for refusing to protest the hanging of Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, Udham Singh, and Rajguru. He was accused of accepting a deal with the king's representative Irwin that released civil disobedience leaders from prison and accepted the death sentence against the highly popular revolutionary Bhagat Singh, who at his trial had replied, "Revolution is the inalienable right of mankind." Gandhi's views came under heavy criticism in Britain when it was under attack from Nazi Germany, and later when the Holocaust was revealed. He told the British people in 1940, "I would like you to lay down the arms you have as being useless for saving you or humanity. You will invite Herr Hitler and Signor Mussolini to take what they want of the countries you call your possessions. If these gentlemen choose to occupy your homes, you will vacate them. If they do not give you free passage out, you will allow yourselves, man, woman, and child, to be slaughtered, but you will refuse to owe allegiance to them. George Orwell remarked that Gandhi's methods confronted an old-fashioned and rather shaky despotism which treated him in a fairly chivalrous way, not a totalitarian power, where political opponents simply disappeared. In a post-war interview in 1946, he said, "Hitler killed 5 million Jews. It is the greatest crime of our time. But the Jews should have offered themselves to the butcher's knife. They should have thrown themselves into the sea from cliffs. It would have aroused the world and the people of Germany. As it is, they succumbed anyway in their millions." Gandhi believed this act of collective suicide, in response to the Holocaust, would have been heroism. On interreligious relations. Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs. Gandhi believed that Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism were traditions of Hinduism, with shared history, rites and ideas. At other times, he acknowledged that he knew little about Buddhism other than his reading of Edwin Arnold's book on it. Based on that book, he considered Buddhism to be a reform movement and the Buddha to be a Hindu. He stated he knew Jainism much more, and he credited Jains to have profoundly influenced him. Sikhism, to Gandhi, was an integral part of Hinduism, in the form of another reform movement. Sikh and Buddhist leaders disagreed with Gandhi, a disagreement Gandhi respected as a difference of opinion. Jews. According to Coomaraswamy, Gandhi initially supported Arab demands with respect to Palestine. He justified this support by invoking Islam, stating that non-Muslims cannot acquire sovereign jurisdiction in Jazirat al-Arab, Arabian Peninsula. These arguments, states Coomaraswamy, were a part of his political strategy to win Muslim support during the Caliphate movement. In post-Caliphate period, Gandhi neither negated Jewish demands nor did he use Islamic texts or history to support Muslim claims against Israel. Gandhi's silence after the Caliphate period may represent an evolution in his understanding of the conflicting religious claims over Palestine, according to Coomaraswamy. In 1938, Gandhi spoke in favor of Jewish claims. In March 1946, he said to the member of British Parliament Sidney Silverman, "If the Arabs have a claim to Palestine, the Jews have a prior claim," a position very different from his earlier stance. Gandhi discussed the persecution of the Jews in Germany and the emigration of Jews from Europe to Palestine through his lens of Satyagraha. In 1937, Gandhi discussed Zionism with his close Jewish friend Hermann Kallenbach. He said that Zionism was not the right answer to the problems faced by Jews and instead recommended Satyagraha. Gandhi thought the Zionists in Palestine represented European imperialism and used violence to achieve their goals. He argued that the Jews should disclaim any intention of realizing their aspiration under the protection of arms and should rely wholly on the goodwill of Arabs. No exception can possibly be taken to the natural desire of the Jews to find a home in Palestine. But they must wait for its fulfillment till Arab opinion is ripe for it. In 1938, Gandhi stated that his sympathies are all with the Jews. "I have known them intimately in South Africa. Some of them became lifelong companions." Philosopher Martin Buber was highly critical of Gandhi's approach and in 1939 wrote an open letter to him on the subject. Gandhi reiterated his stance that the Jews seek to convert the Arab heart, and use Satyagraha in confronting the Arabs in 1947. According to Simone Panter-Brick, Gandhi's political position on Jewish-Arab conflict evolved over the 1917 to 1947 period, shifting from a support for the Arab position first, and for the Jewish position in the 1940s. Christians. Gandhi criticized as well as praised Christianity. He was critical of Christian missionary efforts in British India, because they mix medical or education assistance with demands that the beneficiary convert to Christianity. According to Gandhi, this was not true service but one driven by ulterior motive of luring people into religious conversion and exploiting the economically or medically desperate. It did not lead to inner transformation or moral advance or to the Christian teaching of love, but was based on false one-sided criticisms of other religions. When Christian societies faced similar problems in South Africa and Europe, it led to the converted person hating his neighbors and others' religions. It divided people rather than bringing them closer in compassion. According to Gandhi, no religious tradition could claim a monopoly over truth or salvation. Gandhi did not support laws to prohibit missionary activity, but demanded that Christians should first understand the message of Jesus, and then strive to live without stereotyping and misrepresenting other religions. According to Gandhi, the message of Jesus wasn't to humiliate and imperialistically rule over other people, considering them inferior or second class or slaves, but that when the hungry are fed and peace comes to our individual and collective life, then Christ is born. Gandhi believed that his long acquaintance with Christianity had made him like it as well as find it imperfect. He asked Christians to stop humiliating his country and his people as heathens, idolaters and other abusive language, and to change their negative views of India. He believed that Christians should introspect on the true meaning of religion and get a desire to study and learn from Indian religions in the spirit of universal brotherhood. According to Eric Sharp, a professor of religious studies, though Gandhi was born in a Hindu family and later became Hindu by conviction, many Christians in time thought of him as an exemplary Christian and even as a saint. Some colonial-era Christian preachers and faithfuls considered Gandhi as a saint. Biographers from France and Britain have drawn parallels between Gandhi and Christian saints. Recent scholars question these romantic biographies and state that Gandhi was neither a Christian figure nor mirrored a Christian saint. Gandhi's life is better viewed as exemplifying his belief in the convergence of various spiritualities of a Christian and a Hindu, states Michael de Saint-Chiron. Muslims. Gandhi believed there were material contradictions between Hinduism and Islam, and he shared his thoughts on the Quran and Muslims many times. He stated in 1925, for example, that he had not criticized the teachings of the Quran, but he did criticize the interpreters of Quran. Gandhi believed that numerous interpreters have interpreted it to fit their preconceived notions. He believed Muslims should welcome criticism of Quran, because every true scripture only gains from criticism. Gandhi criticized Muslims who betray intolerance of criticism by a non-Muslim of anything related to Islam, such as the penalty of stoning to death under Islamic law. To Gandhi, Islam has nothing to fear from criticism even if it be unreasonable. According to him, Islam, like communism, was too quick in resorting to violence. One of the strategies Gandhi adopted was to work with Muslim leaders of pre-partition India, to oppose the British imperialism in and outside the Indian subcontinent. After the World War I, in 1919-22, he won Muslim leadership support of Ali brothers by backing the Caliphate movement in favor of the Islamic Caliph and his historic Ottoman Caliphate, and opposing the secular Islam supporting Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. By 1924, Ataturk had ended the Caliphate, the Caliphate movement was over, and Muslim support for Gandhi had largely evaporated. In 1925, Gandhi gave another reason to why he got involved in the Caliphate movement and the Middle East affairs between Britain and the Ottoman Empire. Gandhi explained to his co-religionists, Hindu, that he sympathized and campaigned for the Islamic cause, not because he cared for the Sultan, but because I wanted to enlist the Muslims' sympathy in the matter of cow protection. According to the historian M. Naeem Qureshi, like the then Indian Muslim leaders who had combined religion and politics, Gandhi too imported his religion into his political strategy during the Caliphate movement. In the 1940s, Gandhi pooled ideas with some Muslim leaders who sought religious harmony like him, and opposed the proposed partition of British India into India and Pakistan. For example, his close friend Badshah Khan suggested that they should work towards opening Hindu temples for Muslim prayers, and Islamic mosques for Hindu prayers, to bring the two religious groups closer. Gandhi accepted this and began having Muslim prayers read in Hindu temples to play his part, but was unable to get Hindu prayers read in mosques. The Hindu nationalist groups objected and began confronting Gandhi for this one-sided practice, by shouting and demonstrating inside the Hindu temples, in the last years of his life. Sufism. Gandhi was acquainted with the Sufi Islam's Chishti order, which he discovered during his stay in South Africa. He attended Kanka gatherings there at Riverside. According to Margaret Chatterjee, Gandhi as a Vaishnava Hindu shared values such as humility, devotion and brotherhood for the poor that is also found in Sufism. On life, society and other application of his ideas. Vegetarianism, food, and animals. Gandhi was brought up as a vegetarian by his devout Hindu mother. The idea of vegetarianism is deeply ingrained in Hindu Vaishnavism and Jain traditions in India, such as in his native Gujarat, where meat is considered as a form of food obtained by violence to animals. Gandhi's rationale for vegetarianism was largely along those found in Hindu and Jain texts. Gandhi believed that any form of food inescapably harms some form of living organism, but one should seek to understand and reduce the violence in what one consumes because there is essential unity of all life. Gandhi believed that some life forms are more capable of suffering, and non-violence to him meant not having the intent as well as active efforts to minimize hurt, injury or suffering to all life forms. Gandhi explored food sources that reduced violence to various life forms in the food chain. He believed that slaughtering animals is unnecessary, as other sources of foods are available. He also consulted with vegetarianism campaigners during his lifetime, such as with Henry Stevens Salt. Food to Gandhi was not only a source of sustaining one's body, but a source of his impact on other living beings, and one that affected his mind, character and spiritual well-being. He avoided not only meat, but also eggs and milk. Gandhi wrote the book The Moral Basis of Vegetarianism and wrote for the London Vegetarian Society's publication. Beyond his religious beliefs, Gandhi stated another motivation for his experiments with diet. He attempted to find the most non-violent vegetarian meal that the poorest human could afford, taking meticulous notes on vegetables and fruits, and his observations with his own body in his ashram in Gujarat. He tried fresh and dry fruits, fruitarianism, then just sun-dried fruits, before resuming his prior vegetarian diet on advice of his doctor and concerns of his friends. His experiments with food began in the 1890s and continued for several decades. For some of these experiments, Gandhi combined his own ideas with those found on diet and Indian yoga texts. He believed that each vegetarian should experiment with his or her diet because, in his studies at his ashram, he saw one man's food may be poison for another. Gandhi championed animal rights in general. Other than making vegetarian choices, he actively campaigned against dissection studies and experimentation on live animals, vivisection, in the name of science and medical studies. He considered it a violence against animals, something that inflicted pain and suffering. He wrote, "Vivisection in my opinion is the blackest of all the blackest crimes that man is at present committing against God and his fair creation." Fasting. Gandhi used fasting as a political device, often threatening suicide unless demands were met. Congress publicized the fasts as a political action that generated widespread sympathy. In response, the government tried to manipulate news coverage to minimize his challenge to the Raj. He fasted in 1932 to protest the voting scheme for separate political representation for Dalits. Gandhi did not want them segregated. The British government stopped the London press from showing photographs of his emaciated body, because it would elicit sympathy. Gandhi's 1943 hunger strike took place during a 2-year prison term for the anti-colonial Quit India movement. The government called on nutritional experts to demystify his action, and again no photos were allowed. However, his final fast in 1948, after the end of British rule in India, his hunger strike was lauded by the British press and this time did include full-length photos. Alter states that Gandhi's fasting, vegetarianism and diet was more than a political leverage, it was a part of his experiments with self-restraint and healthy living. He was profoundly skeptical of traditional Ayurveda, encouraging it to study the scientific method and adopt its progressive learning approach. Gandhi believed yoga offered health benefits. He believed that a healthy nutritional diet based on regional foods and hygiene were essential to good health. Women. Gandhi strongly favored the emancipation of women, and urged the women to fight for their own self-development. He opposed purdah, child marriage, dowry and sati. "A wife is not a slave of the husband," stated Gandhi, but his comrade, better half, colleague and friend, according to Lynn Norvell. In his own life, however, according to Suruchi Topper Bjorkert, Gandhi's relationship with his wife were at odds with some of these values. At various occasions, Gandhi credited his Orthodox Hindu mother, and his wife, for first lessons in Satyagraha. He used the legends of Hindu goddess Sita to expound women's innate strength, autonomy and lioness in spirit whose moral compass can make any demon as helpless as a goat. To Gandhi, the women of India were an important part of the Swadeshi movement, Buy Indian, and his goal of decolonizing the Indian economy. Some historians such as Angela Woolacott and Kumari Jayawardena state that even though Gandhi often and publicly expressed his belief in the equality of sexes, yet his vision was one of gender difference and complementarity between them. Women, to Gandhi, should be educated to be better in the domestic realm and educate the next generation. His views on women's rights were less liberal and more similar to Puritan Victorian expectations of women, states Jayawardena. then other Hindu leaders with him who supported economic independence and equal gender rights in all aspects. Brahmacharya, abstinence from sex and food. Along with many other texts, Gandhi studied Bhagavad Gita while in South Africa. This Hindu scripture discusses Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga along with virtues such as nonviolence, patience, integrity, lack of hypocrisy, self-restraint and abstinence. Gandhi began experiments with these, and in 1906 at age 37, although married and a father, he vowed to abstain from sexual relations. Gandhi's experiment with abstinence went beyond sex, and extended to food. He consulted the Jain scholar Rajchandra, whom he fondly called Rajchandra. Rajchandra advised him that milk stimulated sexual passion. Gandhi began abstaining from cow's milk in 1912, and did so even when doctors advised him to consume milk. According to Sankar Ghosh, Tagore described Gandhi as someone who did not abhor sex or women, but considered sexual life as inconsistent with his moral goals. Gandhi tried to test and prove to himself his Brahmacharya. The experiments began some time after the death of his wife in February 1944. At the start of his experiment he had women sleep in the same room but in different beds. He later slept with women in the same bed but clothed, and finally he slept naked with women. In April 1945, Gandhi referenced being naked with several women or girls in a letter to Birla as part of the experiments. According to the 1960s memoir of his grandniece Manu, Gandhi feared in early 1947 that he and she may be killed by Muslims in the run-up to India's independence in August 1947, and asked her when she was 18-year-old if she wanted to help him with his experiments to test their purity, for which she readily accepted. Gandhi slept naked in the same bed with Manu with the bedroom doors open all night. Manu stated that the experiment had no ill effect on her. Gandhi also shared his bed with 18-year-old Abha, wife of his grandnephew Kanu. Gandhi would sleep with both Manu and Abha at the same time. None of the women who participated in the Brahmacharya experiments of Gandhi indicated that they had sex or that Gandhi behaved in any sexual way. Those who went public said they felt as though they were sleeping with their aging mother. According to Sean Skammer, Gandhi in his final year of life was an ascetic, looked ugly and a sickly skeletal figure, already caricatured in the Western media. In February 1947, he asked his confidants such as Birla and Ramakrishna if it was wrong for him to experiment his Brahmacharya oath. Gandhi's public experiments, as they progressed, were widely discussed and criticized by his family members and leading politicians. However, Gandhi said that if he would not let Manu sleep with him, it would be a sign of weakness. Some of his staff resigned, including two of his newspaper's editors who had refused to print some of Gandhi's sermons dealing with his experiments. Nirmal Kumar Bose, Gandhi's Bengali interpreter, for example, criticized Gandhi, not because Gandhi did anything wrong, but because Bose was concerned about the psychological effect on the women who participated in his experiments. Veena Howard states Gandhi's views on Brahmacharya and religious renunciation experiments were a method to confront women issues in his times. Untouchability and castes. Gandhi spoke out against untouchability early in his life. Before 1932, he and his colleagues used the term Antiyajya for untouchables. One of the major speeches he made on untouchability was at Nagpur in 1920, where he called untouchability as a great evil in Hindu society. In his remarks, he stated that the phenomena of untouchability is not unique to the Hindu society, but has deeper roots because Europeans in South Africa treat all of us, Hindus and Muslims, as untouchables. We may not reside in their midst, nor enjoy the rights which they do. He called it intolerable. He stated this practice can be eradicated. Hinduism is flexible to allow this, and a concerted effort is needed to persuade it is wrong and by all to eradicate it. According to Christophe Jaffrelot, while Gandhi considered untouchability to be wrong and evil, he believed that caste or class are based neither on inequality nor on inferiority. Gandhi believed that individuals should freely intermarry whoever they want to, but no one should expect everyone to befriend them. Every individual, regardless of his or her background, stated Gandhi, has a right to choose who they welcome into their home, who they befriend and who they spend time with. In 1932, Gandhi began a new campaign to improve the lives of the untouchables, whom he started referring to as Harians or the children of God. On May 8, 1933, Gandhi began a 21-day fast of self-purification and launched a one-year campaign to help the Harijan movement. This new campaign was not universally embraced within the Dalit community. Ambedkar and his allies felt Gandhi was being paternalistic and was undermining Dalit political rights. Ambedkar described him as devious and untrustworthy. He accused Gandhi as someone who wished to retain the caste system. Ambedkar and Gandhi debated their ideas and concerns, where both tried to persuade each other. In 1935, Ambedkar announced his intentions to leave Hinduism and join Buddhism. According to Sankar Ghose, the announcement shook Gandhi, who reappraised his views and wrote many essays with his views on castes, intermarriage and what Hinduism says on the subject. These views contrasted with those of Ambedkar. In actual elections of 1937, except for some seats in Mumbai where Ambedkar's party won, India's untouchables voted heavily in favor of Gandhi's campaign and his party, the Congress. Gandhi and his colleagues continued to consult Ambedkar, keeping him influential. Ambedkar worked with other Congress leaders through the 1940s, wrote large parts of India's constitution in the late 1940s, and converted to Buddhism in 1956. According to Jaffrelot, Gandhi's views evolved between the 1920s and 1940s, when in 1946 he actively encouraged intermarriage across castes. However, Gandhi's approach to untouchability was different than Ambedkar because Gandhi championed fusion, choice and free intermixing. Ambedkar, in contrast, states Jaffrelot, envisioned each segment of society to maintain their identity group, and each group then separately advanced the politics of equality. The criticism of Gandhi by Ambedkar continued to influence the Dalit movement past Gandhi's death. According to Arthur Herman, Ambedkar's hate for Gandhi and Gandhi's ideas was so strong that after he heard the news of Gandhi's assassination, remarked after a momentary silence, a sense of regret, and then my real enemy is gone. Thank goodness the eclipse is over now. According to Ramachandra Gua, ideologues have carried these old rivalries into the present, with the demonization of Gandhi now common among politicians who presume to speak in Ambedkar's name. Nai Talim, basic education. Gandhi rejected the colonial Western format of education system. He stated that it led to disdain for manual work, generally created an elite administrative bureaucracy. Gandhi favored an education system with far greater emphasis on learning skills and practical and useful work, one that included physical, mental and spiritual studies. His methodology sought to treat all professions equal and pay everyone the same. Gandhi called his ideas Nai Talim, literally, new education. He believed that the Western-style education violated and destroyed the indigenous cultures. A different basic education model, he believed, would lead to better self-awareness, prepare people to treat all work equally respectable and valued, and lead to a society with less social diseases. Nai Talim evolved out of his experiences at the Tolstoy farm in South Africa, and Gandhi attempted to formulate the new system at the Savagram ashram after 1937. Nehru government's vision of an industrialized, centrally planned economy after 1947 had scant place for Gandhi's village-oriented approach. In his autobiography, Gandhi wrote that he believed every Hindu boy and girl must learn Sanskrit because its historic and spiritual texts are in that language. Swaraj, self-rule. Gandhi believed that Swaraj not only can be attained with nonviolence, it can be run with nonviolence. A military is unnecessary, because any aggressor can be thrown out using the method of nonviolent non-cooperation. While military is unnecessary in a nation organized under Swaraj principle, Gandhi added that a police force is necessary given human nature. However, the state would limit the use of weapons by the police to the minimum, aiming for their use as a restraining force. According to Gandhi, a non-violent state is like an ordered anarchy. In a society of mostly non-violent individuals, those who are violent will sooner or later accept discipline or leave the community, stated Gandhi. He emphasized a society where individuals believed more in learning about their duties and responsibilities, not demanded rights and privileges. On returning from South Africa, when Gandhi received a letter asking for his participation in writing a world charter for human rights, he responded saying, "In my experience, it is far more important to have a charter for human duties." Swaraj to Gandhi did not mean transferring colonial-era British power brokering system, favors-driven, bureaucratic, class-exploitative structure and mindset into Indian hands. He warned such a transfer would still be English rule, just without the Englishmen. "This is not the Swaraj I want," said Gandhi. Tiwari states that Gandhi saw democracy as more than a system of government, it meant promoting both individuality and the self-discipline of the community. Democracy meant settling disputes in a non-violent manner. It required freedom of thought and expression. For Gandhi, democracy was a way of life. Hindu nationalism and revivalism. Some scholars state Gandhi supported a religiously diverse India, while others state that the Muslim leaders who championed the partition and creation of a separate Muslim Pakistan considered Gandhi to be Hindu nationalist or a revivalist. For example, in his letters to Muhammad Iqbal, Jinnah accused Gandhi to be favoring a Hindu rule in revivalism, that Gandhi-led Indian National Congress was a fascist party. In an interview with C.F. Andrews, Gandhi stated that if we believe all religions teach the same message of love and peace between all human beings, then there is neither any rationale nor need for proselytization or attempts to convert people from one religion to another. Gandhi opposed missionary organizations who criticized Indian religions then attempted to convert followers of Indian religions to Islam or Christianity. In Gandhi's view, those who attempt to convert a Hindu, they must harbor in their breasts the belief that Hinduism is an error and that their own religion is the only true religion. Gandhi believed that people who demand religious respect and rights must also show the same respect and grant the same rights to followers of other religions. He stated that spiritual studies must encourage a Hindu to become a better Hindu, a Muslim to become a better Muslim, and a Christian a better Christian. According to Gandhi, religion is not about what a man believes, it is about how a man lives, how he relates to other people, his conduct towards others, and one's relationship to one's conception of God. It is not important to convert or to join any religion, but it is important to improve one's way of life and conduct by absorbing ideas from any source and any religion, believed Gandhi. Gandhian economics. Gandhi believed in Sarvodaya economic model, which literally means welfare, upliftment of all. This, states Bhatt, was very different economic model than the socialism model championed and followed by Free India by Nehru, India's first Prime Minister. To both, according to Bhatt, removing poverty and unemployment were the objective, but Gandhian economic and development approach preferred adapting technology and infrastructure to suit local situation, in contrast to Nehru's large-scale, socialized state-owned enterprises. To Gandhi, the economic philosophy that aims at greatest good for the greatest number was fundamentally flawed, and his alternative proposal Sarvodaya set its aim at greatest good for all. He believed that the best economic system not only cared to lift the poor, less skilled, of impoverished background but also empowered to lift the rich, highly skilled, of capital means and landlords. Violence against any human being, born poor or rich, is wrong, believed Gandhi. He stated that mandate theory of majoritarian democracy shouldn't be pushed to absurd extremes, individual freedoms should never be denied, and no person should ever be made a social or economic slave to the resolutions of majorities. Gandhi challenged Nehru and the modernizers in the late 1930s who called for rapid industrialization on the Soviet model. Gandhi denounced that as dehumanizing and contrary to the needs of the villages where the great majority of the people lived. After Gandhi's assassination, Nehru led India in accordance with his personal socialist convictions. Historian Kuru Vilapandikata says it was Nehru's vision, not Gandhi's, that was eventually preferred by the Indian state. Gandhi called for ending poverty through improved agriculture and small-scale cottage rural industries. Gandhi's economic thinking disagreed with Marx. According to the political theory scholar and economist P. Kuparak, Gandhi refused to endorse the view that economic forces are best understood as antagonistic class interests. He argued that no man can degrade or brutalize the other without degrading and brutalizing himself, that sustainable economic growth comes from service, not from exploitation. Further, believed Gandhi, that in a free nation, victims exist only when they cooperate with their oppressor, and an economic and political system that offered increasing alternatives gave power of choice to the poorest man. While disagreeing with Nehru about socialist economic model, Gandhi also critiqued capitalism that was driven by endless wants and a materialistic view of man. This, he believed, created a vicious vested system of materialism at the cost of other human needs such as spirituality and social relationships. To Gandhi, states Parekh, both communism and capitalism were wrong, in part because both focused exclusively on materialistic view of man, and because the former deified the state with unlimited power of violence, while the latter deified capital. A better economic system is one which does not impoverish one's culture and spiritual pursuits. Gandhism. Gandhism designates the ideas and principles Gandhi promoted. Of central importance is nonviolent resistance. A Gandhian can mean either an individual who follows, or a specific philosophy which is attributed to, Gandhism. M. Sanctor argues that Gandhism is not a systematic position in metaphysics or in political philosophy. Rather, it is a political creed, an economic doctrine, a religious outlook, a moral precept, and especially, a humanitarian worldview. It is an effort not to systematize wisdom but to transform society and is based on an undying faith in the goodness of human nature. However, Gandhi himself did not approve of the notion of Gandhism, as he explained in 1936. There is no such thing as Gandhism, and I do not want to leave any sect after me. I do not claim to have originated any new principle or doctrine. I have simply tried in my own way to apply the eternal truths to our daily life and problems. The opinions I have formed and the conclusions I have arrived at are not final. I may change them tomorrow. I have nothing new to teach the world. Truth and nonviolence are as old as the hills.